Hello and welcome to EBRD's COVID-19 Resilience Framework, Environmental and Social Assessment Training Programme. This is Video 6, Agribusiness. My name is Stuart Hume from a company called Environmental and Social Advisory Services, or ESAS, and I'm a social specialist. Now, for the purpose of this video, I'm joined by my colleague, Mark McIntosh. Mark, could you please introduce yourself?
Thank you, Stuart. I'm Mark McIntosh. I'm an environmental specialist with Claverton Associates. I've been working in the environmental sector for about 25 years, and I've undertaken numerous assignments with EBRD, typically focused on PR1 and PR3.
Thank you. So the purpose of this training video is to illustrate how EBRD's environmental and social policy and the accompanying performance requirements can be applied during an environmental and social assessment of a project within the agribusiness sector. And the example used is a large-scale pig farming project. Let's now look at the project in a little bit more detail. So, some key facts. The investment programme is focused on expansion of an existing pig farming business. The project includes the enhancement of biosecurity measures due to increasing risks of animal disease, an expansion of animal holding areas, and improvements to slurry management. And at a broader level, the environmental and social assessment is an excellent opportunity to undertake a rigorous review of all of the client's operations and activities in relation to their environmental and social performance. Let us now look at the application of EBRD's performance requirements to the project. So, starting with PR1, Assessment and Management of Environmental and Social Risks and Impacts. Well, PR1 always applies, and this project was classified as a Category B project. The client has completed a detailed environmental and social assessment. PR2, Labour and Working Conditions. Well, PR2 applies as well, due to the presence of a workforce and multiple primary suppliers to provide goods and services. These include, for example, animal feed, transportation and logistics services. So with various companies providing services and materials to the project, contractor management is going to be a key issue. So Mark, in relation to PR3, resource efficiency and pollution prevention and control, please tell us why PR3 applies to the project.
PR3 will apply to the project due to primarily the resources it will require, which include water, fuel for heating. It would also be the generating potential sources of pollution, and they will need to be managed and controlled. That forms of pollution might be in the form of noise and air emissions, including odour, and also the generation of animal waste, such as slurry, and the need to comply with EU's Industrial Emissions Directive, which includes the application of best available techniques.
So moving on to PR4, Health, Safety and Security. Well, PR4 applies to the project from the use of project road vehicles on the public road network, the generation of hazards to the workforce, and also from food safety risks, which could occur from the inappropriate handling of food products. Now, PR5, Land Acquisition, Restrictions on Land Use and Involuntary Resettlement, doesn't apply to the project because no additional land is required and no future restrictions in access to land are expected to occur. PR6, Biodiversity Conservation and Sustainable Management of Living Natural Resources. Well, PR6 definitely applies to the project due to the animal welfare and biosecurity risks. PR6, Biodiversity Conservation and Sustainable Management of Living Natural Resources. Well, PR6 definitely applies to the project due to animal welfare and biosecurity risks. PR7, Indigenous peoples. Well, PR7 didn't apply because there are no people in the project area that meet the PR7 applicability criteria. PR8, Cultural Heritage. Well, PR8 does apply because there will be new excavations and earth movements during the construction works, and so, for example, a chance find procedure will need to be in place. In relation to PR10, information disclosure and stakeholder engagement, well, PR10 always applies, and for this project, a comprehensive public disclosure and consultation process was undertaken, and there was significant stakeholder interest in the project, primarily associated with the potential for local employment opportunities to be generated, animal welfare issues, waste management, and perceived risks to drinking water supplies. Okay, so using the project, we will now explore the application of PR1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 in a bit more detail. So if you look at the photos included in the slide, you can see that there's a pig in a stall which is much too small for its size. So animal welfare issues needed to be explored in some detail. And on the right, you can see, for example, a temporary storage bay where pigs are held before being sold live to other farms. Now, when you look at that photo, the immediate thing that comes to mind is the fact that the floor is clean, it's in good condition, the walls have a section of stainless steel either side of them, which means that the temporary storage bay, again, is easy to clean and keep sanitary. And so now let's move on to task 1, the review of existing documentation. So various information during task 1 was requested from the client. So under PR1, assessment and management of environmental and social risks and impacts, company policies and procedures were requested, along with environmental and social impact assessment reports, best available techniques, BAT reports, and also copies of the Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control, the IPPC permits, was also collected to determine their current level of compliance. Under PR2, Labour and Working Conditions, copies of the client's human resources policies and procedures were requested. So Mark, in relation to PR3, resource efficiency and pollution prevention and control, please provide us with an overview of the kind of information that was requested during task 1.
The information we requested in relation to PR3 was really a general request for any environmental and social documentation which we could get hold of. This included a request for any environmental and social audit reports. Now, those audit reports could either be internal reports, they could be undertaken by external third parties, perhaps as part of an ISO accreditation, or they could include audits or reports undertaken by local regulators. We also requested information on their use of resources, such as water, electricity, and fuels, and any key performance indicators they may be tracking. When undertaking this sort of request, it's worth considering that some of these elements may be tracked by other departments, such as accounts, who may be tracking energy consumption. As we know, a large pig farm such as this will generate significant wastes, from slurry through to packaging, as well as pigs which have died prematurely. And we requested details of this to understand both what they were tracking and how well they were tracking it. And finally, we asked for any information on groundwater monitoring, where we were seeking information on water abstraction rates and the quality of water to appreciate if there are any impacts on it from the pig farm.
So then moving on to PR4, health, safety and security. So the documentation requested from the client included the health and safety plan to understand how they are identifying and managing health and safety risks to the workforce, and also a food safety plan to again understand how risks to food safety from a consumer perspective have been identified and are being controlled and monitored. Now, PR6, Biodiversity, Conservation and Sustainable Management of Living Natural Resources, a biosecurity plan was requested to understand how risks to biosecurity were being managed, and we'll come on to that in some more detail. So let's now move on to task 2, site visits and discussions. So Mark, take us through your key findings associated with the photos we can see here.
The photos we can see here illustrate some of the key points we found during the site visit. It's important when undertaking a site visit to work through the complete operational system in a logical manner. So in this case, we work through the site from the key inputs, such as the water supply, the operations, and through to discharges, which in this case included the management and treatment of slurry. As you can see from these pictures, the management of slurry was a challenge for the project, with the systems working to capacity and allowing releases to the environment. In this case, it appeared the releases were frequent and essentially normalized, even though they were not permitted. There was also a concern raised that the containment of the slurry lagoon would fail and release a significant volume of slurry to the local watercourse. That would be a pollution event which would have both impacts on the local biodiversity and also the local communities along the watercourse, as well as the reputation of the company and its social license to operate. As these findings were linked back to the management system implemented by the company, we were able to gain an understanding of their overall approach and their strength of their management systems in managing these risks. And we found them to be very weak during the site visit. And there was also a lack of an experienced environmental team to manage these environmental aspects of the business. As the pictures show, we were then concerned about impacts on the soil and groundwater in the region around the pig farm, and considered the investigation of the soil and groundwater quality, and based on the outcome of that, a decision on whether there was a need to remediate this.
Thank you, Mark. And so in relation to the risk to groundwater quality from the slurry leaking from a lagoon forming a channel, is there a need, for example, to check the quality of public water supplies to see if they have been impacted?
In this case, we evaluated where the slurry was going to, whether it was actually going into the local rivers, or soaking into the ground. And then the context of that was also then looking at what the local geology was and the hydrogeology, and whether there was a potential risk to those groundwater or surface water sources.
So let's now move on to PR4, health, safety and security. So in relation to occupational health and safety and food safety, the photos are revealing in the sense that they show, firstly, very good quality floors that can be easily cleaned. The preparation areas have stainless steel. The workers are wearing overalls with rubber boots and have their heads covered. And the food products are being stored temporarily in the red plastic container boxes that you can see, which can be easily washed. And so it does seem that there's a clear attention to food safety as well as occupational health and safety from the workforce. In terms of community health and safety, well, those issues are primarily linked both to the safety of the food product and also the slurry management that Mark talked about earlier. So now let's move on to PR6, biosecurity and animal welfare. Key risks included African swine fever and other infectious diseases. Now, the World Health Organization stated in May 2020 that the current African swine fever outbreak is the most challenging the industry has ever faced. And the task 2 site visit included the inspection of specimen pig holding areas and an assessment of the adequacy of biosecurity controls. The national and regional risk assessments prepared by the government agency responsible for biosecurity was also reviewed, and during the site visit a meeting was organised with the relevant government representatives. And the aim of the meeting is really to understand and assess their response arrangements in the event of a future outbreak, and to understand and explore the kind of resources that they have, which they could use in the event a response is required. The site visit also allows the calculation of compliance with EU minimum space allowances for animals, and also a review of the isolation arrangements for ill or injured animals, which would be separated from the main group. So I'd now like to move on to task 3, the analysis and reporting using EBRD's format. And I'd like to focus on the BAT assessment, the best available technique assessment that was undertaken for this industry sector. So the BAT requirements are to identify and implement education and training programs for the farm staff. Now, this covered a range of areas, including worker health and safety, biosecurity, pollution prevention and control, and human resources policies and procedures to ensure that the staff are familiar with their working conditions and the terms of their employment. Mark, if you could take us through the BAT requirements in relation to water and energy use, plus some others.
Certainly, there's a requirement to keep robust records of water and energy use, livestock feed, waste generated, and the land application of manure. Now, these are not just needed for a bureaucratic purpose. They tie back into the resource efficiency management as under PR3. And they're also looking at pollution control, understanding where the wastes are going, which is with respect to the manure applications on land. This also ties back to biosecurity risks. There's also a need, obviously, to have an emergency procedure and essentially an emergency preparedness and response plan for the project, which would deal with any unplanned emissions or incidents, such as an unplanned release of slurry to the surface around the site. Under BAT, there's also a requirement to implement a repair and maintenance program to ensure that structures and equipment are in good working order and facilities are kept clean. Clearly, this links back to the minimization of having any emergencies occurring on the site through the failure of equipment on the site. And all of this should really linked back also to doing a risk assessment for the project to understand where the main risks are. And that would indicate a program of maintenance and dictate the timetable that should follow.
And so in relation to item 5, BAT also includes the application of feeding measures with lower protein and phosphorant content. And the idea is to provide animal feed that has lower levels of protein and phosphorus, because that will generate lower quantities of nitrates and ammonia in the sewage and slurry generated from the animals. Minimizing water use using high pressure cleaners, using natural ventilation to minimize the use of electric fans and also using low energy lighting, applying manure to land in quantities that can be taken up by agricultural crops, whereas typically there is a tendency for manure to be applied to land without taking into consideration just how much of that manure is actually going to be used in terms of its content by the crops being cultivated. And also by not applying manure to land when the fields are water saturated, frozen or covered with snow, or are sloping or close to water courses. And also not applying during weekends or public holidays when the generation of strong odours could become a statutory nuisance. And finally, BAT also includes storing slurry in covered tanks or using a floating cover to prevent the spread of odours. And so in relation to task 3 and the need to identify gaps that should be addressed in the environmental and social action plan, Mark, take us through some of the key actions identified.
The primary action was the need to appoint a corporate director who had overall responsibility for environmental and social management. And therefore there was a senior person in control of and accountable to the environmental and social performance of the project.
Thank you. And so moving on to number 2 then, additional written policies and procedures were required, covering recruitment, dismissal, equal opportunities, use of the worker grievance mechanism, and also ensuring that workplace bullying and harassment was not taking place within the workforce. And this actually included the use of a worker code of conduct to ensure that all workers were clear as to what their behavioural expectations were. Number 3 was to prepare a comprehensive health and safety action plan and additional procedures covering working in confined spaces, manual handling, and also improvements to some electrical safety. So item number 4, conduct a batch review across all relevant sector activities.
And then picking up on that, in item number 5, specific which ties into the BAT review, was prepare and implement a slurry management plan, which includes improving the facilities designed to hold and treat the slurry. Also staying with the PR3 recommendations was number 6, which was undertake an energy and water efficiency audit. This was all tying back into resource efficiency and developing some KPIs for the project to follow. Item number 7 was looking at a waste minimization audit, taking a look through the whole process on the project and assessing where waste could be minimized. We understood the problem with relation to the groundwater potential contamination from the slurry, and we wished them to install additional groundwater monitoring wells and conduct a soil and groundwater investigation program to enable an assessment of whether there had been a detrimental impact to the environment which needed to be remediated.
Thank you. And so number 9, prepare and implement a stakeholder engagement plan and grievance mechanism. There is currently a lack, for example, of reporting the environmental and social performance of the project back to stakeholders, which is a requirement under PR10. And finally, to prepare a site decommissioning plan for the very last life cycle stage of the project. And so finally, let's take another look at the application of the performance requirements. So for this project, all of the performance requirements apply, other than PR5 in relation to land, because no additional land is required, and also PR7. So I hope you've enjoyed the training video. Please refer to the other resources that are available on the website. Thank you.